Jeremy Clarkson is currently sitting on his hands, waiting for a council to rule on something he shouldn't have had to ask for a second time, let alone a third: a car park, on his own land, for visitors who need somewhere to leave their cars because the farm he runs has become one of the most visited attractions in Oxfordshire. And the paper trail buried inside that single planning application tells you almost everything you need to know about just how much bureaucratic friction one man has had to burn through to keep his customers off a country road. Here's the line from Clarkson's own team that cuts straight to it. In the current application, it states plainly that Season 6 has been commissioned and will air in summer 2027.
Bit of a year, but I am delighted to tell you that Season 6 of Clarkson's Farm is currently being filmed. It's in production. And that's particularly good news for me.
And as of right now, I can tell you that Season 6 of Clarkson's Farm is actively being filmed. It's in production, despite being briefly halted earlier this year when Clarkson wrote in his Sunday Times column that persistent rainfall had made it impossible to plant anything and that a TB lockdown on his cattle had brought things to a standstill. That's a man not hiding what's happening. He's telling the council exactly what the situation is, when the show airs, and why the car park needs to stay open until the end of 2030. No ambiguity, a specific timeline tied to a broadcast schedule that's already in the public domain. 3 additional years for monitoring and review after that, laid out openly, on the record, as a reasonable commercial request. Sit with that for a moment. 3 years stated plainly by a business that has been transparent with the council from start to finish. So let's actually dig into how we got here, because this story starts not with a car park, but with a piece of land that was never going to have a straightforward relationship with planning law. Diddley Squat sits in the Cotswolds area of outstanding natural beauty, the Cotswolds Aomb. Clarkson bought the farm, then known as Curdle Hill Farm, nearly 20 years ago. For much of that time, it was an ordinary arable operation and generated about as much controversy as a field of oilseed rape. Then in 2019, he decided to run it himself. He renamed it Diddley Squat, a nod to how little it was producing, and began trying to make it work as a going concern without the farm subsidies that British agriculture had depended on for generations. That A-on-B designation matters enormously, and it's worth spending a moment on it. The Cotswolds is one of England's most protected landscapes. The whole point of that status is that any development, even something as minor as a gravel patch or a fence line, faces a much higher bar than it would in an ordinary rural district. Planning policy in an A-on-B gives significant weight to preserving the natural character and tranquility of the area. That means visual impact matters, traffic matters. The cumulative effect of commercial activity on a quiet country lane matters. These aren't unreasonable concerns in principle. But what they create in practice is a situation where every single thing Clarkson tries to do at Diddley Squat has to pass through a filter that most farms in England never have to touch. Every fence post, every hardstanding, every porta-cabin has to clear a higher bar than it would almost anywhere else. Keep that in mind, because it explains the sheer volume of paperwork that follows. When the farm shop opened in 2020, it did so against a backdrop of existing planning conditions. Those conditions specified that goods sold on site had to be produced on the holding or sourced from local producers within West Oxfordshire's boundaries. The intention was to keep it genuinely agricultural, not to create a tourist retail destination. What nobody predicted was what would happen when Clarkson put the farm on Twitter and people drove from across the country to buy potatoes. From the very beginning, the parking situation was a problem. Visitors arriving to a farm shop that had planning permission for about 10 spaces were parking on verges, in gateways, along the A44 and the Chipping Norton Road. As early as 2020, Chadlington Parish Council was writing letters to the Planning Authority citing large numbers of haphazardly parked cars during filming as dangerous, describing it as an accident waiting to happen. The council was already logging the tension between a local farm shop, which is what the planning permission described, and the emerging reality of a national tourist attraction. Go back to 2021. Clarkson applies for planning permission for a restaurant near the farm shop. The council refuses it, describing the proposal to convert a lambing shed into a restaurant as visually intrusive and harmful to the rural character of the A-on-B. Planning officers confirmed the shed had already been used without planning permission as a cafe and bar area, which didn't help the application's chances. 53 objections were received. Even the parish council couldn't reach a consensus. They held a public meeting in November, and the vote was inconclusive, which tells you something about how genuinely divided the local community was. Most business owners would have taken the refusal and moved on. Instead, in August 2022, Clarkson opens a 40-cover restaurant in Land Barn using permitted development rights, the legal mechanism that allows agricultural buildings to change use without a full planning application under Class R of the Town and Country Planning General Permitted Development Order. He wasn't trying to hide it. He confirmed it himself in correspondence later. What he may have miscalculated, or what his advisors misjudged, is that permitted development rights for change of use to commercial activity come with conditions that are easy to accidentally breach. Planning solicitors and agents frequently point to diddly squat as a case study in how landowners misread what they're actually entitled to do under Class R, particularly regarding prior approval requirements and whether the conversion genuinely meets the criteria. 12 days into that August, the council serves an enforcement notice. The restaurant closes within about a month of opening. Think about what that actually means in practical terms, not as a headline. In Clarkson's own words, "As a result of this, I've had to sell most of the cows I bought, and now I'm back to using chemicals. I no longer wish to open a restaurant." That's a farmer who had built an entire beef supply chain around a menu, watched it collapse almost overnight, and was forced back onto artificial inputs that he'd made a point of trying to move away from. The beef that was going to feed customers at Land Barn was no longer needed. The cows went. The plan died. A diversification project that had the potential to support British farming, exactly the kind of project the government kept saying farmers needed to pursue as subsidies dried up, was shut down in weeks. This is the bit that tends to get lost in the television narrative. The argument for farm diversification isn't sentimental, it's economic and structural. The UK lost the bulk of its direct farming payments when it left the EU's Common Agricultural Policy. The replacement, the Environmental Land Management Scheme and its predecessors, has been slower to roll out, contested, and in many cases, pays far less. Farmers across the country were actively encouraged by government to find new income streams: farm shops, tourism, accommodation, food processing, renewable energy. Clarkson was doing exactly what the policy environment was telling farmers to do. And in an A-on-B, where the planning environment is significantly stricter, the friction between those two policy signals, diversify and don't impact the landscape, was always going to produce exactly this kind of collision. By January 2023, Clarkson writes to West Oxfordshire District Council to make his position clear. "We do not wish to expand the on-site businesses any further. We are perfectly happy with what we have. Contrary to some of the claims being made, I do not want to turn Diddly Squat Farm into Disneyland. It is, after all, where I live, but we really do need on-site parking. Read that closely. He's not asking to build an empire. He's not trying to expand his retail footprint or add new attractions. He's asking to stop his own visitors, creating a road safety hazard on a country lane that runs past his front door. When the enforcement notice against the restaurant was upheld, he appealed it alongside a separate refusal on the car park. That gets presented sometimes as Clarkson being litigious, but it's really nothing of the sort. If you have a legal right of appeal and the stakes include your livelihood and the viability of your farm business, you use it. Any farmer, any small business owner in any industry would have done the same. The appeal runs across 2 days in March 2023. Planning Inspector R.J. Perrins visits the site twice. 2 separate site visits for a car park and a barn conversion. 2 visits. A formal 2-day hearing. For parking. Inspector Perrins described Diddly Squat as a victim of its own success, and on his second visit, he documented what he found on the roads outside. Verges being churned up, visitors walking in the middle of the road, traffic having to stop, cars squeezing into spaces that weren't really spaces. "From that snapshot in time, I am not surprised," he wrote, "that tensions have run high between some of those living locally and some visitors to the farm shop." He wasn't in any doubt about what the problem was, or what caused it. On the restaurant, Perrins sides against Clarkson, 6 weeks to restore the site. His exact language, 6 weeks is more than sufficient to restore the surrounding land to the condition it was in before the breach took place. 6 weeks, to demolish the commercial operation, clear the space, and return it to agricultural use. A business that employed local people and sold locally sourced produce, shut down by an enforcement deadline. But on the car park, Perrins reaches the obvious conclusion. He grants it. He approves an extension to the existing parking area, formalizes the temporary parking arrangement, approves new access arrangements off Chipping Norton Road, and permits a small cafe attached to the lambing shed alongside it. Even an inspector who ruled against Clarkson on the restaurant could see that parking was never the problem. It was the solution to a road safety issue that had existed for years. 3 years from June 2023. That clock runs out around mid-2026, which is exactly where we are right now. And Clarkson's team isn't asking for something new. They're asking the council not to switch off a working arrangement that has done exactly what it was supposed to do. Here's the context that puts that request in perspective. Because this isn't the first time Clarkson's had to come back to the council and ask for permission to keep the same piece of ground available for parking. Back in February 2023, before the appeal ruling had even landed, there was already an earlier temporary application, 70 spaces, 4 rows, across a 60 by 32 meter field, with permission requested until January 2025. Then the inspector's ruling gave him a different 3-year window to around June 2026. Now in 2026, the application seeks consent until the end of 2030, 3 separate bites at the same application for the same gravel field, a facility that Oxfordshire County Council's own Highways Authority confirmed in writing was preventing dangerous parking on the adjacent road. Think about what that actually represents. A farmer identifies a genuine problem. The success of his operation is causing a road safety hazard outside his gate. He solves it. He then has to re-justify that same solution to the council 3 separate times across 3 years. That's not Clarkson being awkward or difficult. That's a planning system that sets short time limits on temporary permissions and then requires full reapplications each time, forcing a working business back to the drawing board repeatedly for something that was never genuinely controversial to begin with. The car park wasn't the contentious element of Diddley Squat's planning history. The restaurant was. The car park had broad support from almost every stakeholder who looked at it: the Highways Authority, several local businesses, elected officials, and even the planning inspector who refused the restaurant. Local butcher Henry Lawrence, who supplies Diddley Squat and runs Hook Norton Butchers, put it plainly at the appeal hearing in 2023. I would like to see a car park granted of the correct capacity, not only for the success of the farm shop, but for the success of local businesses too. Diddley Squat Farm could be the crown jewel in the local sustainable farming movement, Tanquate. That's a direct supplier with a commercial stake in the matter, telling the planning authority that the infrastructure Clarkson was asking for would benefit businesses beyond his own gate. And he was right. Because when Diddley Squat draws visitors to the area, the knock-on effect isn't limited to the farm shop. Clarkson himself pointed this out at the time of the restaurant refusal. The village shop is doing better. The cafe in the village, the pub in the village, they are all doing better. More footfall doesn't stay at the farm, it spreads into the village. And here's the part the council itself can't argue with, because they put it in writing. After Season 2 aired, and the planning battles became part of the show's storyline, West Oxfordshire District Council released a public statement. Their exact words: "We understand that the planning process shown in Season 2 of Clarkson's Farm can seem obstructive. Not might seem. Can seem." They acknowledged it on the record. They went on to insist they treat Diddley Squat Farm no differently to anyone else, and have a legal responsibility to apply planning law correctly. Fine words. But the council then went even further in a later statement, practically admitting the car park dispute didn't need to become a dispute at all. "We encouraged Diddley Squat Farm to make an application for a temporary car park long before the appeal." Read that again slowly. The council is on record saying they told Clarkson's team to sort out parking before the appeal. He did sort it out, and it still took a formal planning inspectorate hearing, a 2-day session with witness evidence, and 2 site visits by an independent inspector to actually get it approved. If the council knew a car park was the right outcome before the appeal, why did achieving that outcome require the full apparatus of a planning inquiry? The council's public statements walk a careful line. They list what's been approved at Diddley Squat: the lambing shed, a barn, the farm shop, the cafe unit. They say they don't want to see the farm shop close. They say they're pleased local produce is sold there. They end with the phrase, "Our door has always been open and will remain open should they choose to work with us." It sounds reasonable. It reads as conciliatory. But look at the paper trail underneath it. A business that has had to fight formally on 3 separate occasions for a car park. A car park that the council's own earlier statements suggested they'd advised him to build. A car park that an independent inspector confirmed reduces road safety risks. A car park that Oxfordshire County Council's transport lead has now endorsed in writing for the 2030 application. Not every local voice agrees, and this isn't the place to pretend otherwise. One resident who lived near the farm described the closure of the restaurant as a win for the community and said the farm had simply outgrown the location it occupied. Andrew Hutchings, the Chadlington Parish Council chairman, put it diplomatically, "We have reached a tipping point between a farm shop and a tourist attraction." That's a fair characterization of the underlying tension, and the parish council couldn't reach a consensus when it voted on the restaurant application, which means the local community itself was genuinely split, not uniformly opposed. Those voices deserve to be part of this. One unhappy neighbor's view isn't a reason to approve or refuse a planning application on its own, but neither is it something to brush past. Set those voices against the full picture, though. A council that publicly admits it encouraged the car park, a highways authority that formally endorsed it, a business that employs local staff, sources produce from local farms, and actively works with other nearby producers in what Clarkson described as a cooperative arrangement, and one elected official who looked at all of this and reached a different conclusion from the council's cautious inertia. That was County Councillor Liam Walker, who backed Clarkson's appeal position outright. His words, "Local councils need to understand and appreciate farming has significantly changed for many reasons, and the planning rules need to also change to allow them to diversify quickly. Farmers right across the country deserve our support." That's not a fringe view. That's an elected official reading the same paper trail and arriving at the conclusion that the system isn't working fast enough for the businesses it's supposed to serve. Here's the detail that changes everything about where this application stands right now. The backing that matters most hasn't come from West Oxfordshire District Council. It's come from a completely different authority. Oxfordshire County Council, the people whose actual job is road safety and transport planning, have stepped in and backed the extension without hesitation. Their transport development lead, Oliver Eden, was direct about it. His submission to the planning authority confirmed that the additional car parking is an important facility for accommodating visitors who would otherwise likely create disruption and road safety risks on the adjacent highway. Eden's reasoning tracks precisely with what the original inspector found in 2023. The farm generates visitor numbers that physically cannot be absorbed without dedicated parking. Cars don't disappear because a planning authority declines to sanction a car park, they just park somewhere else. Eden went further. Oxfordshire County Council formally supports the extension of the temporary permission to align with what he described as the expected ongoing demand associated with the television series schedule. The people responsible for Oxfordshire's roads are telling the district planning authority to match the consent to reality. The program brings visitors. Visitors need somewhere to park. Pretending otherwise just pushes the risk back onto Chipping Norton Road and into the village. Clarkson's team said much the same in their own submission. The site continues to be popular and attracts sufficient customers to warrant the provision of additional parking. It maintains the associated benefits to the farms and other businesses that supply the farm shop and cafe, and in turn, the economic and social well-being of the wider area." End quote. That's not a celebrity throwing his weight around. That's a business owner pointing out, accurately, that local farms and suppliers depend on this operation too. The 2030 application also notes something worth highlighting: the provision of the dedicated additional parking and careful monitoring by the applicants has also ensured that parking on the adjacent highway is precluded. In other words, the car park has done exactly what it was built to do, for 3 years, without the road safety issues that predated it. The application team also points out that the landscaping around the car park has started to mature and is beginning to assimilate into the surrounding landscape. That's directly relevant in an A-on-B context, where visual impact is one of the core planning considerations. The objection in 2022 was partly that a car park on agricultural land would harm the character of the area. 3 years on, the hedgerows are growing, the hard standing is settling, and the visual intrusion is diminishing over time. The case for refusing the extension gets weaker the longer the car park has been there without the predicted environmental damage materializing. Hijos dem. There's also a broader context here that doesn't get mentioned enough when this story surfaces in the news. West Oxfordshire District Council itself is about to change in a significant way. The 2026 local elections were the final vote for the District Council in its current form. It's scheduled to be abolished and replaced by a unitary authority in 2027 as part of a wider local government reorganization in Oxfordshire. Whether that transition affects the speed or character of planning decisions at Diddley Squat remains to be seen. What it does mean is that the institution that has been making these decisions since 2019 will not exist in its current form for much longer. The successor authority will inherit the Clarkson file alongside everything else. Meanwhile, on the show itself, which is the direct reason this application exists, there's a quietly significant backdrop. Season 5 launched on Amazon Prime Video in June this year, covering what Clarkson has described as a particularly brutal period for the farm. A bovine TB outbreak triggered a lockdown that prevented him buying or selling cattle for 2 months. The farm went offline commercially in ways that had nothing to do with planning. And then Season 6, now confirmed in planning documents, faces its own production complications. Clarkson wrote in February that filming had been suspended entirely because of weather. It hasn't stopped raining since the beginning of the year, he told the Sunday Times. Nothing to film when you can't plant and your cattle are locked down. Yet it's back in production now, with a summer 2027 air date on the record. That matters to the planning application because it's precisely what makes the 2030 timeline reasonable. When the original 3-year consent was granted in 2023, the inspector's reasoning was grounded in uncertainty about how long the show's popularity would sustain visitor numbers. The original time limit, as Clarkson's team's submission explains, was set on the basis that if Season 3 was the final season, 2 years of post-broadcast monitoring would be sufficient to assess demand before returning the land to agriculture. But the show wasn't canceled. It's been renewed for a 6th series, with a 7th potentially in the works. The circumstances that justified a short temporary permission have changed. The duration of consent needs to reflect that change. So where does this actually leave things? The 2030 application is sitting with West Oxfordshire District Council. No ruling date has been given. But look at what's in front of them. A highways authority that has already said yes. A business that has been completely transparent about its timeline and reasoning. A 3-year track record proving the car park does precisely what it was built to do. Mature landscaping reducing the visual impact that concerned planners in the first place. A county council transport lead on record backing the extension. A planning inspector who in 2023 found the car park necessary even while ruling against the restaurant. And a commercial operation that is demonstrably generating economic benefit for the local area. There is no genuine case left to make against it. There's just a council that has, by its own admission in its own public statements, made this substantially harder than it needed to be, and that now faces a fairly straightforward decision with an almost complete set of professional endorsements already on the table. If that decision lands the way the evidence points, it won't be a victory handed to Clarkson. It'll just be the council finally catching up to what the Highways Authority, the planning inspector, the local councillor, and even West Oxfordshire's own past statements had already established months ago. Watch for that ruling. We'll cover it the moment it lands. Tell us in the comments what we should dig into next. Is it Hawkstone's accounts and how the brewery is actually performing? Is it the Farmer's Dog pub and whether that car park battle, yes, there's another one, is going to resolve cleanly? Or do you want us straight back here the second West Oxfordshire finally makes up its mind on Diddley Squat?